Hi, everyone. If you're like me, you have found mobile phones in the classroom to be both a blessing and a curse. There are times when I want my students to have access to the outside world, but there are other times when I just want my students fully engaged in the classroom without distracting technology. This is where our sponsor Flipped comes in. Flipped is a first ever classroom engagement application that keeps students from getting distracted by their mobile phones when they're learning, and it does it in a really clever way. Some instructors have even reported that Flipped has been associated with increased grades and reduction in attrition. If you are interested in learning more about Flipped, please visit flippedapp.co/psych. That's FLIPPDAPP.co/psych. Welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld, along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. This is a special edition of the Psych Sessions podcast, IntroPsychSessions, conversations about teaching introductory psychology, where we showcase some of the best teachers from across the nation, from high school, 2-year, and 4-year institutions. We hope that you'll find this helpful as you go to prepare your own intro psych class for the upcoming year, as we talk about assessment, course design, and pretty much everything else. So let's get right into it. Please enjoy Intro Psych Sessions. Today, I have with us Jason Eggerman from Spokane Community College, and I'm really excited to have you here because Jason and I get to work together on TIP Northwest. We're in the steering committee together. We represent Washington, in our respective cities and also nationally. So awesome, welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and we just jump right into this. What we want to know is about your introductory psychology course.
Yeah.
And first of all, I think we should probably start with, do you teach a variety of different offerings, like online and hybrid and face-to-face?
I teach intro fully online, fully face-to-face, and sort of in a hybrid modality. So I've kind of done all three of those over the years.
I imagine that's going to shape some of your questions or answers to some of these questions as we go along. So if you want to sprinkle any of those in from those different modalities, you can totally do that. But so what should we know about either your college or your students, the student population? Anything particular that sticks out to you about Spokane Community College?
I would say most of the students that I work with at Spokane Community College, I mean, obviously it's tough to generalize what all your students are like, but I'd say maybe about a third of my students are dual enrollment. So they're coming to us from local high schools. That's what we call running start. So I've got a lot of juniors and seniors in high school. I've got a lot of students. I would say another third of my students are 25 to 27 and older. And they're people who are working on a second career, trying to get back into nursing school or something like that. They're ex-military, coming back on the GI Bill. They're refugees or immigrants who are, just coming to this country at, 25, 30 years old and trying to get an education started. So it's a really diverse mix of people.
Right. And how does Spokane, how does that shape the way that you guys approach education in general?
I think probably one of the ways it shapes education in general would be, at least for me, speaking on the intro side of things, is most of the students that I have are not attempting to major in psychology. So I know, prior to being at Spokane Community College, I taught as an adjunct at several different community colleges in San Diego County. And most of the institutions I taught at down there, if you had a section of intro psych, the vast majority of your students were looking to transfer to places like San Diego State or UCSD or Cal State San Marcos and either major in psych or major in soc or major in criminal justice. They were on that 4-year track. And I would say the majority of the students that I have now are not. They're on a vocational track. So it sort of changes the way, at least it has for me, changed the way I teach intro psych, because for a lot of these folks, intro psych is often the one and only psych class that they are ever going to take in their life.
Right. So you adjust it for your students. I love it. How big are your intro psych classes?
So face-to-face classes are capped at 40. So the biggest sections I have would be about 40 people. Usually it doesn't, it fills all the way up to 40, but then you have a couple people who decide, maybe this time slot doesn't work for me or this section doesn't work for me. So I'd say a typical face-to-face class is probably somewhere in the 35 to 38 range. And then our online classes, we're really fortunate. Our online classes are actually capped at 25.
So, that's nice.
Yeah. A typical online section for me is about 25 students, which really makes it one of the things they're big on is, making sure that in the online classes you actually have good what they call regular and substantive interaction. That's our buzzword now, with the students in your online classes.
Right. In a face-to-face class, I'll be specific with face-to-face classes. How do you prep, or what do you do before the course starts?
So are you talking like before the beginning of a quarter?
Yeah, before the beginning, before you ever meet your students. What are you up to?
So I usually try to make contact with my students either through email or through the LMS at least about a week before the quarter starts. Just introducing myself, sending. Oftentimes, if I have it ready, I'll send out the syllabus 3 or 4 days ahead of time. I'll launch the LMS. We use Canvas, and start posting a couple announcements. With lots of disclaimers of, hey, if you don't want to look at any of this until the first day of the class, you don't have to look at any of this. But with having a lot of older adult students, I do find that they oftentimes really appreciate, they want to know. They want that information as soon as possible. And so you oftentimes, I would say I'm probably interacting with a quarter of my class before the class ever starts, answering questions by email or, contacting them.
I think I know the answer to this question for you already, but before the class starts, is the course done? No, it's not.
No.
Okay, I'm surprised.
Not.
Okay.
Done in the sense of I have a general roadmap. I've been doing intro psych this will be going on my 11th year, and I'm not sure I've ever done a quarter exactly the same in terms of assignments or in terms of content. One of the things that, and this may be sacrilegious to speak of this with the STP community when you talk about things like project syllabus and all the standards and whatnot, but I have not put a calendar in my syllabus for over 5 years. And I just ask my students on day one to trust me that I'll be telling you what topics are coming up next, and you'll always have advanced warning about any kind of assignments. I'm never going to spring anything on you. But I really do enjoy having the flexibility of moving topics around. When something relevant comes up, it's like, okay, well, this will be a good time to talk about social psych, so we're going to talk about social psych next week. And it works well for me. I definitely know for a lot of folks that would never work for them. They like to have the structure going in, and I'm able to pull that off with my students. Obviously, some of them are resistant to that. You have the ones that really want the calendar on day one, and they're resentful for about a week, and then you just have to keep telling them, trust me, and they eventually buy in.
So what's class preparation like for you? Because you must have to sit back and reflect on what am I going to do this week if you know the general roadmap, but you don't know exactly what's going on.
Right. No, I have a general, I know I'm going to hit the neuroscience chapter. I know I'm going to start with a lot of, what is psychology? Where did we come from? Research methods. You kind of know where you're going to start. Mm-hmm. So the first third of the quarter, first 2 to 3 weeks is probably mapped out pretty well when I start. And then I would probably make those decisions 2 weeks at a time. So I'm sort of mapping and planning the course 2 to 3 weeks at a time.
Okay, so let's talk about structure of your course. What is that general roadmap? Not in terms of content so much, but maybe the other things, assessments, exams, papers. I know that you do some research, some literature review with your students, or at least they're reading articles in your class, right?
Yeah, I don't know as if I would call it a lit review or anything like that, but one of my goals is to get them looking at journal articles very early in the quarter. And I tell them, when I say looking at journal articles, it really is more just holding a photocopied journal article. And I just say, hey, just take some time, look through this. I know you're probably not going to understand a lot of what's in there. So it's more of just sort of exposing them to journal articles, because most of them, in fact, I would say 99% of them have never seen an academic journal article when they come into my class. So it's not so much teaching them how to find them. We don't even have the databases at my institution that would allow us to go find, psychology journal articles. But it's just giving them a couple examples of talking through, okay, well, this is what an intro section looks like. This is what a method section would look like. And just kind of getting them familiar with that.
Yeah, that's great. How many exams do you give in your class?
I would say the number of exams I give has progressively increased over the years. I used to give 3, maybe 4, and I think last quarter I was up to almost 7. But to clarify on that, the size of the exams has changed as well. I've sort of gone to this system where instead of giving 4 exams that are all the same size, I'm starting to give 7 exams, or even potentially next quarter 8 exams that are progressively bigger. So one of the things with a lot of my students not necessarily being super familiar with how college works or how to study or how to read a textbook, I've found that it oftentimes what you're doing is you're doing a lot of coaching on academic preparedness. You're doing a lot of coaching on study skills. You're doing a lot of coaching on trying to build self-efficacy. And that takes time. And so if they're bombing the first 1-2 exams and you're only given 4, the folks who get it figured out, there might not be enough time to dig themselves out of the hole. Mm-hmm. And so I've kind of started going to this system where exam 1 might only be 10 questions. It's really more like a quiz, but I call it exam 1. Exam 2 then might be 20 questions. So the exams kind of get progressively bigger as time goes on.
And are they comprehensive?
They are all comprehensive, yeah. And the students, of course, hate that at first. This actually started in my online class because it's a lot easier to do this in an online class than it is in a class where you've only got 50 minutes. In a 50-minute class period, you can't keep increasing the sizes of the exams beyond a certain point because it's just not reasonable to have them do 100 questions in 50 minutes or something like that. But online, my exams in my online classes do just get progressively bigger so that by the end they're about 150 questions, but it's cumulative the whole way through the quarter.
Right.
And
it's fascinating to think about.
Well, what's really interesting is when you talk to students and they say, I don't even really need to ask what's going to be on the final at this point because you've asked me about 6 times a question about negative reinforcement, and I probably got it wrong the first 3 times. But then I realized that you're just going to keep asking, and so I better learn that concept pretty well.
Yeah.
You've asked me 6 times about correlation and causation, so I might have missed it the first 2 or 3 times, but now I know it's coming.
Yeah, and I expect that you probably vary the way that you're asking these questions and trying to get them at different angles just to make sure that students actually are learning the concepts. So how do you work with content in your class? We obviously have all this. We have 16 chapters of content available to us. How do you think about that?
Well, the textbook I use actually has 10 chapters of content.
And which book?
I use the Griggs Concise Introduction book, so it's only got 10 chapters, which is kind of nice. But even then, I still don't find myself being able to cover all 10 chapters, or at least not everything that's in all 10 chapters, so I'll kind of pick and choose. I really do try to use I forget the citation of the paper, but you probably know which one I'm talking about that has sort of the 5 pillars and the pyramid-looking scheme.
The Common Core document,
yeah,
APA.
I try to use that as a guideline so that, I may cover neuroscience but not sensation and perception. I may cover memory but not intelligence testing. But I do try to make sure that I have a good representation each quarter of the different kind of areas or topics.
Yeah.
But I would say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I got off of the idea that I have to cover everything. And I figure if I cover, fewer topics, but I cover them in a very deep way so that 2 or 3 years later, when a student comes up to me, they still understand correlation and causation and they can have an intelligent conversation about it. They still understand operant conditioning and they can use the terms 2 or 3 years after the class is over. That's kind of my goal.
Right. Limit those concepts, really go for them. How do you think about skills in your class? What kind of skills are your students hopefully coming out with?
Hopefully they're coming out with good study skills, the ability to read through course material and understand a textbook. And I tell them that. I say, look, here's chapters that we didn't cover, but my hope is by covering things the way we did and spending the amount of time that we did on the chapters that we did cover, that if you are interested in one of the chapters we didn't cover, you should hopefully have the skills at this point to get a basic understanding of it without me having to deliver it all to you, because you've got the study skills, you've got the thinking skills. I don't really get into any kind of paper writing just because there's no, I mean, your courses at your institutions are probably similar. There's no prerequisites for intro psych. It's an open enrollment institution. So English as a second language is oftentimes, I do some writing type assignments, but it's usually nothing more than maybe a paragraph or a page. Lots of reflective writing. I want them reflecting on things and applying things. But in terms of synthesizing some sort of a 3, 4, 5-page essay, I just don't do that in intro psych.
Yeah, that's the direction I've gone to at this point. So what other, or not specific activities maybe, but maybe walk us through, like if I was to observe your class, if I was coming to a typical day, what would we be doing in your class?
So we may be doing an activity. I've got a lot of things that we do in the classroom that are sort of participation-based and worth points, and the students don't necessarily know when those are going to take place. So I may show, we may watch a video about a person with a psychological disorder, and I'll start the day by talking about, different characteristics for diagnosing a disorder. Does it cause distress? Is it causing impairment in functioning? And then they'll watch the video and they'll have to come up with examples and, sort of a think, pair, share thing. Well, they'll watch the video and make their own list, and then they'll talk to the person next to them and compare what did you come up with, and then we'll have sort of an all-class brainstorm discussion to see what everybody came up with, and they'll all turn in their brainstorming sheets for 5 or 10 points of participation or something like that.
Sure. A question that is coming up for me is, how do you get those students to come to that class reading? Or how do you think about students reading what you've assigned?
Yeah. I guess you hope that they do the reading. I try to incentivize it with essentially all my classes at this point are either online or hybrid. So the most I have them is 4 days a week for 50 minutes. We're on the 10-week, 11-week quarters, so a typical face-to-face class would be 5 days a week, but I have them sometimes 4 days a week or sometimes 3 days a week. And so I tend to assign stuff in the modules for them to do that's on Canvas. So I'll assign videos for them to watch from YouTube, and then there'll be mandatory practice quizzes that they have to master the practice quiz before they can get to the next item in the module. It's set up in a way that they can't just click on anything they want. And I sort of send lots of reminders through the LMS. I monitor their progress. Hey, remember, we're talking about this concept next week. Looks to me like you haven't even opened the module on classical conditioning yet. Trust me, you're going to want to look at this in advance. It's not easy stuff.
So you're not the kind of instructor who just sets things out there and says, now it's the student's responsibility.
No. Well, I mean, ultimately it is their responsibility, but I also believe a lot in maybe little nudges or reminders, just because I know my typical student might be a single mom with 2 jobs and 3 kids, so who's in college for their very first quarter. So I not to necessarily say you're going to hold their hand and do everything for them, but I'll take if we finished up class on Thursday and I say, okay, for Monday you need to look at this module on classical conditioning, watch these videos, do these readings, 2 or 3 little practice quizzes, and then you'll be prepared for the lecture on Monday, which is about classical conditioning. I'll take a peek at it on, say, Saturday afternoon, and I can see who hasn't finished the first practice quiz. And I can send a targeted email. One of the things I love about Canvas is you can send emails through the gradebook, right? So I can go in and say, send a message to everybody who hasn't done this practice quiz yet, and it's a very targeted, what I would call like a nudge message. Hey, I'm just looking and I noticed, and they as far as they know, it's a direct message to them because they don't see that it went out to
it's
30 other people. And they're like, oh wow, he's paying attention to what I'm doing individually. I guess I better get on that.
Yeah, that's really a great strategy. Let's see, what else do I want to ask you? We got a couple minutes left. What's day 1 look like in your class?
I definitely don't go over the syllabus on day 1 because I tell them, you're probably getting 2 or 3 other syllabi today, and I'm going to guess that most of your other instructors are going over the syllabus, and you're sick of hearing about course policies, and you're sick of hearing about what assignments you're going to have. So usually on day one, I've got, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 main goals. I want them to get comfortable with me. So I try to do some, personal introduction, kind of tell them where I went to school and about my family and stuff like that. Let them see that, your instructor's human. Mm-hmm. So I want them to get comfortable with me. I want them to get comfortable in the classroom environment. So there's always going to be, I wouldn't say like an icebreaker activity, but there's always going to be some sort of introductions where they're going to have to get up and walk around and talk to a couple other people and get to know some familiar faces, so that when they come in on day 2, I say, when you come in on day 2, I want you to recognize at least 3 or 4 people. And then the third thing would be to try to tease them or pique their interest. So sometimes I'll not necessarily I wouldn't say I cover content, but I'll tease them on day 1 with maybe some Elizabeth Loftus, fallibility of memory stuff. And I'll say, well, if you want to know more about this, you're just going to have to wait, because we'll get to it eventually. And they want to know everything right away.
Right.
I'll tease them with some split brain stuff. I'll tease, so I'll try to find some of the stuff. And you know what content this is from having taught intro psych too. You find something that they're going to have a million questions about, and you just sort of tease them with it for 10 minutes and say, well, we're going to learn more about this later.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I've never heard of it. It's called teasing, but I like the idea. I always think that a first class needs to have a hook of some sort. I like the teaser, because you might hit some of it on week 2 and some of it on week 6, and students are going to be thinking back to that first class. I love the idea. Do you do extra credit in your classes?
Occasionally. I try not to do too. If I do, it's not going to necessarily amount to much. So I use a weighted grade book. So no matter how many points there are, the practice quizzes on Canvas are 5% of their grade. One quarter it might be 120 points, the next quarter it might be 80 points, the next quarter it might be 200 points. But however many points there are, it's 5% of their grade. So it's a weighted grading system. And what I like about that is you can offer extra credit and you put it in a smaller category. So like my exam category is usually weighted at 60 or 70%, and the in-class activities or homework are often weighted at 10 to 15%. So I can offer 5 points of extra credit and stick it on a homework assignment, and they think, 5 points on well, 5 points in the homework category is not the same thing as 5 points on an exam.
Right.
It's 7 times less in terms of the weighting scale. So it's not a typical, I would say most syllabi, when you look at them, it breaks down total points. This class has 1,000 points. You need to earn 900 points to get an A, type of a thing. My syllabus doesn't say anything about how many points there are. It just says this category is worth 5% of your grade, this category is worth 20% of your grade, and it doesn't really matter how many points there are in the category. However you do in that category is 20% of your grade.
Yeah, that's great. I'm thinking here that you must, did you have the freedom at your institution to do this before you had tenure, or did you change things up?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I don't think I changed it up until maybe a year or 2 ago. Because I just didn't know about, you go with what you know.
Yeah.
And I had only ever seen syllabi with a point structure, and I had only ever had as a student syllabi with a point structure. Mm-hmm. And it was, I don't know, maybe just luck, or I stumbled across it one day, or the instructional designers were explaining it in a workshop, and I said, wait a minute, so this means, because I always want, you always want a certain category to be 10% of their grade. But you have to figure out in advance, okay, how many total points are there? And 10% of that is this many points, so I got to make sure that this quarter we have 128 points of quizzes in order for it to be 10% of their total grade, or 12% of their total grade. Well, this way I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, that's great.
If I have 7 quizzes or if I have 12 quizzes, it's still 10% of their grade.
Well, I have 2 more questions for you, and these can be quick ones.
Sure.
Number 1, are you happy with your course?
Never. I don't think I've ever, like I said, I'm going in my 11th year on doing intro, and I don't think I've ever taught it exactly the same way 2 quarters in a row. I'm never happy with any specific section. I'm never happy with any specific lecture. I think if you're not constantly trying to tweak it and change it and improve it, then I don't know. Just for me, that doesn't work.
Right.
You know,
and then maybe you're out of touch with something if you're not continually doing that.
Right. And I've had this debate with folks in other disciplines or with other folks that no, once you get it kind of dialed in, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of not my mindset.
Right, but here you are. You're taking current events. You're leaving flexibility in your class for current events to shape your lectures and the content that you're covering. And so, you're just approaching it a little bit differently than that. What's the next change in your course? What are you thinking about?
Oh man, I don't know. I've got some of the flipped classroom stuff that I want to maybe move a little more in that direction because, at this point I am still using a lot of class time to deliver content. And I sort of feel like if you make some good videos that you could put some of that online for the students to watch in advance or watch afterwards if they're absent. So probably moving more of the content delivery to a flipped system. That would probably be the next step for me.
Yeah, great. I appreciate how you flipped classrooms, it's all the hype, it's all the rage, right? And I appreciate how you are thoughtful about it and not just jumping into it right away. And I've been thinking a lot about, through conversations with people like Steve and Chu, that things are not inherently good and bad. There are good ways of doing lecture, and there are bad ways of doing lecture. There are good ways of structuring your course and bad ways of structuring your course. So,
and I think there's certain things that I don't want to flip. There's certain stories that I want to tell, or certain segments of lectures that I want to deliver in class because you want to see their reaction to it. So I think it's more a matter of looking for flippable moments in the sense of, okay, this content, if I was going to lecture about the parts of the eye and rods and cones, it's like, okay, I can probably do this online. I probably don't need to deliver that content in class. The videos though, where you're looking at the split brain patient of the gentleman who's playing Pictionary with himself. I don't know if you're familiar with the video where he's drawing a phone and he's trying to guess what his left brain is trying to guess what his other hand is drawing. I wouldn't want to flip that because it's just too much fun to show them that in class and then break it down and watch them try to struggle with understanding what's going on here.
Yeah. You better copyright that term "flippable moments" because
anybody can have it.
Yeah, well, it's a really good one. I've never heard it before, but I like it. Jason, thanks for doing this with us. I appreciate hearing from you about your intro psych class.
Thanks.